Sorry about that. Whoa, that flipped up there quickly. Great to have you joining me this morning. And today we're looking at an interesting one, which is kind of where are we going to locate our story? In other words, what the story is real important. It's real important to have an embracing view of our story, to know that we're all trying to create and craft stories. It's just very much part of life and very much part of the human condition. And part of the question is, okay, what kind of story are we writing? Another piece that I want to focus on today, sort of drilling down a little bit, is where are you choosing to tell the story from? Because I think there's a couple of options here that are interesting. So we're looking at the story of Noah and the flood. Noah in the ark with his family, the animals, in a boat that's not really a boat, but that was a previous sermon. But in this ark, and the storm is raging. And I think there's a basic part here I was thinking about in terms of where are we going to tell the story from? Are we going to tell the story from inside the boat, or are we going to tell the story from outside the boat? Very different there. Very different there. So just, and I've preached on this a number of times, but it just came to me, again today, like how significant of a spiritual principle is at work here in terms of where we tell the story from. So if you think of having two hands, we have one hand here, and we'll just call this hand anxiety, fear, worry, anger, whatever negative emotion you're wrestling with at this particular time. And we have over in the other hand, we have God's story, right? And God's writing. Now, if you think of this hand here, I'm just going to use anxiety because that's one I wrestle with a lot. If you think of anxiety versus God's story, real important to remember that anxiety can write its own story and will do so very, very effectively. Now, it's an effective writing of the story, but it's not effective in terms of life change or in terms of how to deal with life. It's just a very effective way to write a story, a very efficient way, because you just think about with anxiety, you think about how fast anxiety writes a story. Like when I'm anxious, and I imagine you share this too, my anxiety can write a story in a nanosecond that ultimately leads to the most dire outcomes that are imaginable. And now I have imagined them, and it took my mind exactly 2 seconds to get through all of them. That's the anxiety writing a story, and it's dangerous and it's deadly. That's writing from outside of the boat. That's writing from in the storm. Now, on the other hand, we can look at it and say, and have more wonder around, I wonder what story God is writing here. I wonder what God is doing here. And that's the story written from inside the ark. Now, remember, the ark is already has, we've talked about the animals that are going in. We've talked about family going in. Talked about like good things that are packed away already, food and fodder and water. Food, fodder, water. There's say that 3 times fast. So that's all packed away. That is all deep within here. And it's much quieter than the anxieties of our life. And it's based on this, and I'm using these 2 words very deliberately, this stillness and this knowing. This stillness and this knowing. Now, that is such a different way to write a story. Imagine a story written from stillness and knowing with a capital K. And it's not knowing how it all turns out. It's not knowing what the next day is going to bring. It's not knowing what the next hour is going to bring. It comes back to this deep centered place of like, I'm okay. Regardless of what happens out there, regardless of things that may be deeply tragic, hurtful, spiteful, challenging, horrible in every sense of the word, there's a deep, deep, deep embedded part that knows we're okay. And that deep embedded part is buried deeply within the ark. And it's there. Where are we going to write our story from? It's important to remember that the anxiety part of our brain has absolutely no use for God's story at all. No use. It will not access it. It will not ask you to consider it, because all anxiety does, because it comes from hell, all anxiety wants is to be anxious. But this other part, this God's story here, God's story actually will be able to acknowledge the anxiety. It's important to not think of God's story as like this remedy where I just take a few pills and then anxiety goes away. That's not it at all. God's story is about incorporating the anxiety, putting it within a matrix, putting it within a context that helps to work. And I think that's part of it, that we have this inside the boat, outside the boat. The God story is able to hold the both are there, both are present. And how do we hold them? That's the real question. And that's where faith just gives us so much more, so much more, so much more of a breath. And with this, folks, like a little aside, I was thinking about, and this probably should have done this just as its own one-off, but a little aside here is this beautiful thing C.S. Lewis said. It's real important to remember not to confuse the two. So sometimes we can take something we know of God and we can implant it in the anxiety and allow that anxiety to tell us what we know about God. Oh, be super careful there. Um, One author, C.S. Lewis, famously said, "What is a heresy?" Well, as a heresy is one branch of the tree of truth that we cut off and fashion an axe to cut the whole tree down. That's a pretty startling quote. And that's what can happen is we can if we're really driven by anxiety, fear, desire for all the negative emotions, you could say desire for power too. It's very easy to take God's story and just pick like one little piece of knowledge that actually is true, place it within the anxiety, the fear, desire for power, whatever, and then actually it quickly becomes false. That's what terrorists do, right? In a certain way. So I would just say be cautious about that and really try to think through, yeah, what is the story that anxiety is asking me to write today? And then ask yourself, is that true? Am I absolutely sure it's true? What am I without that thought? What am I with that thought? That's Byron Katie. And then think, yeah, what about God's story? Lean a different way. What's God's story? What's God's story trying to tell me? God's story will try to tell you anxiety is part of the story, by the way, but it will also tell you other things like you have friends. You're going to be okay. God's with you. Life is good. And the final chapter's not written. There's just some basic parts to come to from inside the ark. So that's the thought for today, friends. I hope that makes sense. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting little play. Like, what is it like to tell the story from inside the ark? What's it like to tell the story from outside the ark? I hope that all makes sense. So that's the thought for today, friends. And what we're going to do now is we'll do our little meditation followed by our little prayer. After we do the prayer, what we're going to do is do a little blessing, and then we'll say hello to folks on social media. We have a lot of people who comment principally on Facebook. So you are warmly invited to comment on our New Church Live Facebook page. I'll be reading some of those comments. A lot of people comment on my page as well as the different formats we stream in. And we try to get to them all. So with that, friends, let's get a little breath here. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you, bring you peace, bring you home. Amen. All right, friends, let's take a quick little gander here on the New Church Live's Facebook page. And I know a lot of folks actually here in the Northeast actually had a lot of snow last night over the past couple of days, which is kind of fun to hear about. All right, so let's say hi to people. Patricia, great to see you joining us this morning, and good morning to you. And Marcus, good morning to you, buddy. I hope you're doing well. Good morning. Be still and know. Sherry, it's just that stillness is just so interesting. I mean, we have a service coming up in a couple of weeks that prayer is about creating a stillness into which another voice may speak. Oh, what a great quote. I find that so true. Mary writes, why do we think our heads are our go-to? Keep on driving right past the thinking exit and proceed to the rest stop at God. Simple. Mary, it's so true, right? It's like it's this siren song that if I just think that anxiety, like here's the crazy part of my mind where I am just like batshit crazy is my mind really believes that anxiety has something to offer, that my anxieties will actually tell me the truth. And that just is not true. I mean, maybe if I'm being chased by a tiger, it'll tell me a truth I need to know. And I've been chased by a tiger exactly 0 times. So we need to be really careful about that because I do think people confuse them pretty regularly. At least I do. Teresa writes, good morning. And good morning to you, Teresa. You got some snow yesterday, didn't you? Carl from California writes, the challenge for me, at least, is to take risks with some sense of knowledge, clarity, and trust about which path is right or best or most responsible one to take. Yeah, and isn't it interesting, Carl? Like when we can do that, there's so much of the I'm touching my chest here because I just think of like the compass points. There's just I'm going to take the journey and I have a sense of what true north is. Now, again, we may take a bunch of routes and a bunch of detours, but that being said, I do have this deep sense within me of a much greater truth, much more groundedness than what I can imagine. All right, friends. Well, thank you for your comments as always. Wonderful to hear your insights. And I certainly am wishing you all the very best as you go into the rest of your week. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.